Every now and then I'm reminded what a feisty bunch we are. We pulled up in the meeting house parking lot this morning, and Joanne was looking at something on her phone, a picture that had been sent to her, and she burst out laughing. And I said, "Well, what's so funny?" And she said, "Well, here's Bella Lucas with her wife-to-be at the Pride March, and she's wearing a shirt that says, 'I don't care what the Bible says.'" And oh, I think how difficult it must be to be surrounded by people who tell you all the time what the Bible says, and yet who forget so much of what the Bible says. A lot of that going around. I have a friend who teaches in a Catholic school where the children are required to attend weekly Mass. I'm well acquainted with that custom since I grew up Catholic and my mother was the principal of the Catholic school. I remember once when our school wasn't being held, if I could go to her school for a day, unwittingly picking the one day of the week they celebrated Mass, resulting in my attending church twice in 1 week, which was excruciating, like having to eat spinach for lunch and supper. But back to my friend. The priest at his school, who is ordinarily a very affable man, gets along well with the kids, works well with the kids, he was sick that day. And so they brought in a ringer to conduct the weekly Mass, a priest from another parish who during the homily, the Catholic word for sermon or message, told the school children that people not educated in Catholic schools grew up to be evil monsters who harm people. I'll just let that sit there for a minute while you contemplate the irony of a Roman Catholic priest boasting about the moral superiority of persons educated in Catholic institutions. Sometimes people ask me how I'm bald. How did that happen? In my case, it was theological. I hail from a religious tradition whose theological absurdities caused me to pull my hair out. There is no institution so holy, no theology so orthodox and pure that it guarantees its members moral superiority. In my final message, which will be sad news for those of you who've liked this series, and very good news indeed for those of you who've just been hanging on waiting for something else. But today's my final message contrasting the difference between religion and spirituality. And I want to conclude this series by saying that far too often religions see and assume the worst in others. In religions, there are always demons aplenty. Spirituality, on the other hand, is keenly aware of evil, but it begins by seeing and assuming the best in others. Because religions often see the worst in others, because it has eyes for the wicked and depraved, it usually finds it, absorbs it, and is eventually consumed by it. Conversely, spirituality sees the best in others, and because it has an eye for beauty and goodness, it usually finds those virtues, absorbs them, and is ultimately consumed by them. If Quakerism had a shining moment of theological brilliance, it was when early friends spoke of humanity's inner light, when other Christians were emphasizing humanity's inner darkness or original sin. If we've ever had a moment of great theological brilliance, that was it. When a religion begins with the assumption that people are evil, sinful, and estranged from God, it must provide a fix, a way of getting people right with God. And when they do that, pay careful attention to see who claims the power and authority to do that, whether through a sacrament or a prayer or some other ritual designed to get people right with God. It is usually a pastor or a priest. Notice the power they accumulate, the authority in which they drape themselves. Notice the deference they receive, the esteem in which others hold them, and all because they have perpetuated the myth that you are broken, that God is mad at you, and that they alone can fix it. Think of the power we give them. Whenever a politician votes against the public good, we too often discover they have been paid to disregard their duty. Their corruption is usually brought to light by examining the trail of money. Look who's profiting from a new law, and there we'll find the source of corruption. Follow the money, we say. Follow the money. That's true not only of political corruption, it's also true of religious corruption. Except in religion, we don't follow the money. Well, sometimes we do. But in religion, we especially follow the power. We follow the power. We look to see who benefits from bad theology. Does a particular theology permit some to accumulate power over others? Follow the power. If a religion demands forgiveness and restitution, look carefully to see who has given themselves the power to pronounce that forgiveness or impose that restitution. Follow the power. When you follow the power in religions, you will not find a God. You will find a person claiming to speak for God. You will find a person persuading you of your sin and then persuading you that they have spiritual authority you do not have, that they alone can announce forgiveness and restore you to God. Follow the power. And if at the end of power's trail you discover someone hard at work convincing you that you are less than, that you are morally deficient, you can be reasonably certain that you have found yourself in a religion. But if you discover light and promise, not only in others, but also within yourself, you will have discovered the golden treasure of true spirituality, that God's light is given freely and joyfully in equal measure to all. There's a psychiatric term called projection, where one displaces one's feelings onto a different person, animal, or object. And Jesus taught about religious projection when he spoke of those who railed against the splinter in someone else's eye while ignoring the beam in their own. That's religious projection. And it runs rampant in religion. We experienced it last Sunday with my granddaughter. Our 7-year-old granddaughter went to her other grandparents' church, where a Sunday school teacher told her she was full of sin and would go to hell if she weren't saved. Our granddaughter, who shares her candy who does her farm chores without complaint and cheerfully, who befriends everyone she meets, who cuddles her 5 kittens and makes sure they're safe and fed every day, who cried on the last day of school because she knew she would miss her teacher and her friends, is apparently so full of sin that God cannot stand the sight of her unless Jesus advocates on her behalf. The Sunday school teacher who told my granddaughter this, who told my granddaughter that she was full of sin, is a product herself of that dark and bitter philosophy and considers it her divine obligation to pass that poisonous perspective on to others. I don't think she'll succeed with my granddaughter, who said to me later that day, "I only prayed with her because she made me." And while I want my granddaughter to treat others with dignity and respect, I suggested that the next time someone tell her she was full of sin and headed to hell, that it would be perfectly appropriate for her to tell them they were full of beans. At the end of his life, the Quaker James Naylor was robbed, beaten, and left to die in a farmer's field. Discovered by other travelers, he was carried to the home of a nearby Quaker, where he died. These were some of his last words. "There is a spirit which I feel that delights to do no evil, nor to revenge any wrong, but delights to endure all things in hope to enjoy its own in the end. As it bears no evil in itself, so it conceives none in thoughts to others." Did you catch that? As it bears no evil in itself, so it conceives none in thoughts of others. Religion and spirituality are the exact same in this regard. They both give you precisely what you expect to find. If you look for sin and evil, you'll find it everywhere you look. So too, if you look for goodness and beauty, you will awaken each morning surrounded by it. In the silence, the word cast kept coming to my mind. And I thought of all the different definitions of it. You can cast a fishing line. You can wear a cast if you break an arm. You can pour a cast if you have a mold. You can pour metal or plastic into it and form something. You can cast out someone from your home. You can cast off an old piece of clothing. I think it's interesting the kind of cast we pick in life. The first 5 books of the Bible were written by at least 4 different sources, each of whom had a different take on creation. The 2 distinct stories assumed the goodness of creation and humanity. And God created the world, and God looked and said, "Behold, it is good." Another author of those books was less optimistic and spoke of Adam and Eve being cast from the garden forever. It's interesting to me that Christianity has typically chosen to emphasize the cast out tradition. I admire Bella's response with her t-shirt after reading a story this week, Pride Week, of a pastor in Texas who said in his sermons that gay people should be placed against a wall and shot in the back of the head. Well, that's clearly interpreting the Bible in this particular way, isn't it? What would happen if we said that humanity was not cast out, but cast in? Cast in the image and love of God, so that God's love and presence was poured into each of our forms, so that we were not cast out, but cast in. Think what a difference that would make. Friends, this day and forever after, may you see beauty. May you see goodness where you expected to see wrong. May you find grace where you expected to find hardship and difficulty. And may the presence of God and the example of Jesus, his Son, and the ongoing presence of God's loving Spirit fill you this day, friends, and always. Amen. Turn and greet friends.